The photo came through on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was folding laundry, thinking about what to make for dinner, when my sister's name flashed on my screen. A photo sent by mistake, meant for someone else entirely. I opened it without thinking, and in that single second, standing barefoot on my own kitchen floor, 8 years of my marriage turned into a lie I hadn't known I was living. My husband was holding two newborn babies. The caption underneath read, "Daddy loves you both." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, phone in hand, and felt something inside me go completely, permanently still. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 38 years old and I live in Denver, Colorado. For most of my adult life, I believed patience was a virtue that eventually got rewarded. I'm a forensic accountant by trade, which means I spend my days finding the small inconsistencies people think no one will notice. A number that doesn't add up, a transaction that doesn't belong, a story that almost makes sense but doesn't quite. I built a career on trusting evidence over emotion. I just never thought I'd need those skills at home. Marcus and I got married when I was 30. He was ambitious, funny, the kind of man who filled a room without trying. He co-owned a logistics company that was just starting to take off, and I loved watching him build something from nothing. We used to talk about the family we'd have, how many kids, what we'd name them, whether we'd stay in the city or move somewhere quieter. It felt inevitable, like something that would simply happen to us the way summer follows spring. It didn't happen easily, and it didn't happen for a long time. We tried for 2 years before we even sought help. Then came the appointments, the tests, the terminology that started to feel like a second language. IUI, IVF, hormone injections that left bruises I hid under looser shirts. We lost 3 pregnancies before they ever became anything more than a heartbeat on a screen, each one a private grief I carried mostly alone. Because Marcus always seemed to recover faster than I did. I used to lie awake doing math in my head the way I did with client files. Where did this go wrong? What did I miss? I blamed my body. I blamed stress, my job, a glass of wine I'd had before I knew I was pregnant the first time. I blamed everything except the truth, because the truth wasn't something I had access to yet. Through all of it, Marcus held my hand in waiting rooms and told me the same thing over and over, like a promise he needed to keep saying out loud to make it real. We'll get through this together. I believed him the way you believe the sun will rise without evidence, without question, simply because the alternative was unthinkable. My sister Lauren was there too, or at least she seemed to be. 3 years younger than me, always warm, always available with a hug or a casserole or a call me anytime that I took at face value. She used to tell me she admired my strength, that she didn't know how I did it. I never once considered that admiration and envy can wear the exact same face. The day the photo came through, I'd just gotten off a video call with a client, the kind of dull afternoon that makes up most of a life. The light was coming through the kitchen window at that low, late fall angle. My phone buzzed twice. And then I was looking at my husband's face, the same face that had told me only 3 weeks earlier that we should maybe try one more round of treatment, looking down at two infants like they were. The center of his entire world. Lauren called almost immediately after. I picked up without saying anything. "Claire," she said, her voice cracking, "I didn't mean for you to find out like this." I hung up. I didn't ask a single question. I didn't need to. 8 years of forensic training had taught me one thing above all else. Once you find the first inconsistency, you don't confront the person who created it. You gather everything first. You confirm the full shape of the lie before you ever let them know you've seen it. So I opened my laptop instead. I found a family law attorney with the highest rating in the city, a man named Patrick Moss, and booked the earliest appointment available. 2 days later, I sat across from him, in an office that smelled like fresh coffee and expensive paper. And I signed the initial paperwork to begin divorce proceedings against my husband of 8 years. My hand didn't shake. I remember being almost surprised by that. I didn't tell Marcus. I didn't tell Lauren I knew. I went home and made dinner like nothing had happened, because for the first time in years, I understood something with total clarity. I wasn't the one who needed to explain myself. While my husband celebrated the arrival of 2 children with the woman who had once called herself my sister, believing I still knew nothing at all, I was already 3 steps ahead of both of them. And what I did next, quietly, without a single tear, was something neither of them saw coming. The morning after I signed the paperwork, I made coffee for one person instead of 2, and I didn't feel a single ounce of guilt about it. Marcus had texted the night before about a work trip that would keep him out of town for a few days. I read it twice, then I got to work. If there's one thing my career has taught me, it's that people who are confident they'll never get caught leave the messiest trails. Marcus had spent 8 years building a reputation as a devoted husband, struggling through infertility right alongside me. That story required maintenance, and people busy maintaining one story rarely notice they're leaving evidence of another. I started with the credit card statements. We'd always kept mostly separate accounts, a decision that now felt almost prophetic. But there was a joint account we used for house expenses, and buried in months of grocery runs and utility payments. I found 4 separate charges to the same hotel, in a suburb neither of us had any reason to visit. 2 nights each time, always Thursday into Friday. I cross-referenced the dates against my phone's location history, something I'd forgotten I'd even turned on. 3 of those hotel dates lined up exactly with weeks I was recovering from IVF procedures. Weeks Marcus had told me he needed to clear his head by staying late at the office. I sat at my kitchen table until nearly 2 a.m., and piece by piece, the last 3 years of my marriage rearranged themselves into something I barely recognized. Lauren had told me more than once she was simply driving Marcus to his appointments when I couldn't make it. "I'm just helping out," she used to say, like it cost her nothing. I found records showing those appointments often happened on days Marcus had nothing scheduled at all. By the time I found the joint photo storage account, one Marcus didn't know I still had access to, I wasn't even surprised anymore. Photos going back nearly 3 years. Lauren at his office holiday party, standing just a little too close. A weekend getaway logged as a business trip, with a beach in the background nowhere near any client site. They hadn't been careless exactly. They'd simply never imagined I would look. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from confirming a betrayal you already half suspected, and it's different from the shock of discovering one you never saw coming. This was the second kind. And underneath the pain, something colder was taking shape: clarity. For 8 years I had absorbed every hard moment of our marriage as my own failure. Now I understood I'd been carrying the weight of someone else's choices the entire time. I didn't confront Marcus. I didn't call Lauren back. Instead, I built a file: every hotel charge, every mismatched alibi, every time-stamped photo, organized the way I'd organize evidence for a client, methodically, without commentary. I sent the whole thing to Patrick Moss 2 days later. He read through it during our second meeting, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, he said simply, "This is thorough." I told him I'd had 8 years of practice noticing what other people missed. But here's the thing, I thought I already understood the whole shape of what had happened to my marriage. I had no idea I was only looking at the surface. It was 3 days after that meeting when my phone rang with a number I recognized, but hadn't expected: Diane, Marcus's mother. We'd always had a warm relationship, the kind built on genuine affection. This call felt different the moment I answered. Her voice was thin, unsteady, in a way I'd never heard from her. "Claire," she said, and then nothing for a long moment, just breathing on the line. When she spoke again, she was crying, trying and failing to keep her voice even. "Please," she said. "Don't tell him yet." I stood very still in my kitchen and felt the ground shift beneath something I thought I already understood completely. "Don't tell him what, Diane?" She didn't answer. She just kept repeating those 4 words, over and over, like they were the only thing holding her together. I realized, standing there listening to my mother-in-law fall apart on the phone, that I had uncovered an affair. But somehow, impossibly, I had the growing sense I had not yet uncovered the truth. I met Diane 2 days later at a small coffee shop halfway between our houses, a place we'd been to a dozen times before for easy, comfortable conversations. This time she was already seated, hands wrapped so tightly around her cup her knuckles had gone pale. She looked older than I remembered, not in years, but in something heavier, the kind of tired that comes from carrying a weight for far too long. "I need you to understand something," she said before I'd even taken off my coat. "What I'm about to tell you, I should have said 8 years ago. I've regretted staying silent every single day since. I didn't say anything. I've learned that silence is often the fastest way to get someone to keep talking." Diane took a slow breath and told me she had known something important since almost the very beginning of our marriage. "Does Lauren know?" I asked, because that was the question sitting heaviest on my chest. Diane shook her head firmly. "No, neither does Marcus. Only me and one other person, Dr. Foster." "Your old doctor." My stomach tightened. Dr. Elaine Foster had overseen nearly every stage of our fertility treatment 8 years earlier. "There was a report," Diane said, her hands trembling. "Results from testing back when you two were still trying everything. It came to the house by mistake, addressed to Marcus. I opened it without thinking, the way you do with mail that looks routine." "It wasn't routine." She paused. "I read it, and I understood immediately that if Marcus saw it, it would break something in him I didn't think could be repaired. So I called Dr. Foster directly and asked her, as a mother, to let me handle it in my own way. She agreed against her better judgment, because she'd known our family for years and trusted me to do right by everyone." Diane looked down at the table. "I never did right by anyone. I just delayed the pain and let it grow into something much bigger." She wouldn't tell me exactly what the report said, not there, not in pieces. "You deserve to see it properly," she said, her voice catching, "the way I should have shown Marcus 8 years ago." Then she said something that stayed with me the rest of that day. "Those babies changed everything, Claire, but not for the reason Marcus thinks. If I had known what that meant, I might have braced myself differently for what came next." I called Dr. Foster's office the next morning before I'd even finished my coffee. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 5 years, not since Marcus and I had quietly agreed to stop treatment. "I need to see my old file," I told her, "all of it." There was a pause, then, "Come in this afternoon. I'll pull everything myself." Her office looked almost exactly as I remembered, the same soft gray walls, the same watercolor prints meant to make devastating news feel gentler. She met me with a thick folder already waiting on her desk. "Before I show you this," she said, "I want you to know I've regretted my part in this for years." Diane came to me in a moment of real distress, and I made a choice I wouldn't make again. I let a mother's fear override a patient's right to her own results. "I'm sorry, Claire." "Truly?" I opened the folder with hands steadier than I expected. Hormone panels, ultrasound notes, the familiar shorthand of 8 years of trying. But near the back was a report I'd never seen, dated almost exactly 8 years earlier, addressed to Marcus, never to me. I read through the medical language slowly, the way I'd once translated confusing financial statements for clients, until the meaning became unmistakable. The results weren't about me at all. They were about Marcus. The report showed clearly and clinically that the difficulty we'd faced for years hadn't originated with my body the way I'd spent nearly a decade believing. There was a significant male factor finding. One Dr. Foster had recommended in writing that we discuss together as a couple. That letter had gone home addressed to Marcus. Diane had opened it by mistake, and instead of handing it to her son, she had made a decision alone, in a moment of panic, to protect him from a truth she thought he couldn't survive. I sat in that quiet office and felt 8 years of self-blame rearrange itself into something entirely different. Every late night doing mental math on what I might have done wrong. Every procedure I'd endured believing my body was the reason we were suffering. Every apology I'd whispered to Marcus in the dark. None of it had ever belonged to me. Why didn't she ever tell him? I asked, though I already sensed the answer. Fear, I think, Dr. Foster said gently. Diane loved her son fiercely, the way some mothers do. Protecting him mattered more than the truth. She convinced herself that if he never knew, it would never have to hurt him. I don't think she considered what it would eventually cost you both. I thought about Lauren, and about a photograph of Marcus holding two newborns, a caption calling him Daddy without hesitation. If this report was accurate, those children weren't biologically his, which meant Lauren either didn't know the truth herself, or she knew something even more complicated than an affair. I didn't say any of it out loud. I asked Dr. Foster for copies of everything, and she made them without hesitation. I didn't confront Marcus that day. I didn't call Lauren. I didn't even call Diane right away. I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, the folder on the passenger seat beside me, thinking about every version of my marriage I had believed in over the years, hopeful, grieving, betrayed. None of them had been the complete truth. Now I was holding the piece that changed the meaning of everything else. When I finally called Diane that evening, my voice was calm in a way that seemed to surprise her. I have the file, I told her. I know what it says. There was a long silence, then something like relief in her exhaustion. Now I know why your mother looked terrified, I said, the moment she saw those babies for the first time. I didn't hear from Marcus for almost 2 weeks after I filed the paperwork. He was staying with Lauren, playing house with two infants who carried a truth he didn't yet understand. I spent those 2 weeks quietly finishing what I'd started, meeting with Patrick, organizing financial records, moving through the practical motions of ending a marriage, while carrying a secret that would eventually end it for reasons far different than the ones I'd originally believed. It was Diane who called me on a Thursday evening, her voice tight with dread. Marcus is coming home tonight. He wants me to meet the babies properly. A pause. He's bringing Lauren. I understood immediately what that would take from her. Diane, you don't have to do anything you're not ready for. I've hidden this for 8 years, Claire, she said quietly. I think it's time I stopped. I wasn't there when it happened, but Diane told me everything afterward, in enough detail that I could picture it clearly. Marcus arrived first, letting himself in with the same easy confidence he carried into every room. Lauren followed with a baby carrier in each hand, her face carefully arranged into something between apology and pride, exhausted, Diane said, but lit up underneath it. The way people look when they believe they've finally gotten something they wanted for a long time. Marcus set his bag down and turned to his mother with an expression Diane said she'd never forget, open, hopeful, almost boyish. Mom, he said, gesturing to the twins Lauren was lifting from their carriers, you're finally a grandmother. Diane told me the room went very quiet. She looked at those two small faces, and something inside her simply gave out. All the years of holding this in, all the nights convincing herself she was protecting her son, collapsed the instant she saw those babies in his arms. Her legs went unsteady beneath her. She reached for the back of a chair. Marcus's smile faltered into confusion. Mom, what's wrong? The words that came out weren't the ones she'd rehearsed for 8 years. They came out smaller, more broken, but finally, after everything, true. "Wait," she whispered. "She didn't tell you." Marcus went still. Lauren, standing behind him with one baby still in her arms, went pale, a reaction Diane noticed immediately, one that told her Lauren didn't know either. "Tell me what?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping into something that already sensed the ground shifting. Diane didn't answer right away. She thought about me, about the years I'd spent blaming my own body for something that had never been my failure. That thought gave her the courage to move. She turned and walked into the study, kneeling in front of a small fireproof safe she'd kept for exactly this moment, the one she'd told herself for 8 years she would open when she was ready. Inside was a single sealed envelope, worn soft at the edges from years of being touched, considered, and put away again. She carried it back into the living room and set it on the coffee table. Marcus stood over it without touching it, bracing himself. Diane said, "The way people do right before they step into cold water." "What is this?" he asked quietly. "Sit down," Diane said. "Please." He sat. Lauren lowered herself onto the edge of an armchair, still holding one of the twins, the baby fussing softly in the tense silence. Diane laid the contents out one page at a time. The original lab results, the letter from Dr. Foster addressed directly to Marcus, and a handwritten note Diane had added years earlier, the same week she'd intercepted the mail. Marcus picked up the medical report first. Diane watched his eyes move across the page, slowly at first, then faster, then slower again as he reread certain lines. "This says," he started, then stopped. He looked up. "This is about me." "Yes," Diane said softly. "This isn't Claire's file, this is mine." His voice went strange and flat. "You're telling me the reason we couldn't have kids was never her." Diane nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Marcus set the paper down like his hands had become unreliable. 8 years, he said. 8 years I let her think it was her fault. She apologized to me, Mom. She used to cry and apologize to me, and I let her because I never knew there was anything to say otherwise. Lauren had gone very still, the baby now quiet against her shoulder. Diane told me. She watched something shift across Lauren's face as the pieces arranged themselves. If the report was accurate, if the condition 8 years earlier had been real and unresolved, then the children in her arms, conceived with Marcus during their affair, weren't likely to share his biology either. The same condition that had made conception nearly impossible with me would have made it just as unlikely with her. "Marcus," Lauren said carefully, "what does this mean?" He didn't answer her. He was still looking at his mother, something raw building behind his eyes. "You knew," he said. "You've known for 8 years and you let me believe." He couldn't finish. He stood, pacing the length of the room like his mind had stopped being able to hold still. "I was trying to protect you," Diane said, her voice breaking. "I know that's not an excuse. I've hated myself every single day since." "Protect me from what?" Marcus's voice rose. "From the truth, from a piece of paper. You let me watch my wife blame herself for 8 years. You let me watch her go through procedures, through losses, thinking it was her body failing us, when the whole time—" He pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead. Lauren stood slowly, shifting the baby onto her hip. "Charles Marcus," she corrected herself, quieter now. "I need you to look at this with me. If what this says is true, then these babies—" She couldn't finish either. Something passed between them that had nothing to do with love, and everything to do with the sudden, cold understanding that whatever they'd built together over the past 3 years had been built on the exact same broken foundation as the marriage he'd just destroyed. "I need to see Claire," he said finally, his voice hollow. "I need to talk to her." "Marcus," Diane started. "Maybe you should sit with this first." But he was already moving, grabbing his keys, pulling the front door open before anyone could stop him. Diane called after him once, but he didn't turn around. She stood in the doorway and watched his car pull out too fast, tail lights disappearing into the dark. What Marcus didn't know yet, driving toward my house with 8 years of buried truth cracking open behind him, was that some doors, once they've closed all the way, don't open again just because someone finally understands why they should have stayed shut. Marcus showed up at my house a little after 9 that night. I watched his headlights sweep across the living room wall before I even heard the car door, and I knew with a strange kind of calm exactly what this visit was about. I finished folding the towel I was holding, set it down, and walked to the door at my own pace. He looked undone in a way I'd never seen, collar askew, eyes red-rimmed, still holding the medical report, creased now from being gripped too tightly. "You knew," he said before I'd even opened the door fully. "Claire, you knew, didn't you, about the report?" "I found out 2 weeks ago," I said, "the same way I found out about Lauren." "By accident." He flinched at her name. "Claire, I swear to you I had no idea about any of this." "I know," I said, and I meant it. That was the strange part. Standing on my own porch, looking at the wreckage of a man who had just learned that 8 years of guilt he'd let me carry alone had never belonged to me. I felt something closer to sorrow for him than anger. Not enough to change what I'd already decided, just enough to remember that he, too, had been living inside a lie someone else constructed, even if he'd built plenty of his own lies on top of it. I let him in, not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted this conversation to happen on my terms in my space, where I could end it whenever I chose. He told me everything: how his mother had shown him the file, how Lauren had gone pale realizing the twins likely weren't biologically his either, how the affair he'd built with such careful confidence had crumbled in 10 minutes. "I'm not asking you to forgive Lauren," he said. "I'm not even asking you to forgive me for the affair. But Claire, if my mother had just told me the truth 8 years ago, none of this would have happened. This started with a lie that wasn't mine." I let him finish. "I'd learned that people almost always reveal more when you let them talk themselves all the way to the end." "You're right," I said finally. "The lie wasn't yours. Your mother made a choice she shouldn't have made, and she's going to carry that for the rest of her life. I think she already understands that better than either of us could tell her." I paused. "But you're wrong about one thing. This didn't start with your mother's secret. It started the day you decided that, whatever you were missing at home, you were entitled to go find somewhere else with my sister, without ever once telling me you were struggling." "I didn't know how to say it," he said quietly. "So you let me carry more," I said. "You let me believe I was the reason we couldn't have a family for 8 years, while you built one with someone else. The medical report doesn't undo that. It explains part of the pain. It doesn't erase the choice you made in response to it." He didn't have an answer for that. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice smaller than I'd heard in years. "Now the divorce moves forward," I said. "Nothing about tonight changes that. And Lauren, that's not my concern anymore," I said, and saying it out loud I found it was true. Somewhere between the hotel receipts and Diane's confession and the clinical language of an old medical file, I had stopped needing to know what happened to my sister. Charles left a little before midnight. I stood at the window and watched his tail lights disappear, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I felt something settle in my chest instead of tighten. For 8 years I had measured my worth against a story that was never true. The ending of my marriage had never really been about a photograph, or a betrayal, or even a secret buried in a file. It had been about the moment I finally stopped waiting for someone else to tell me the truth and went and found it myself. The final mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning, 3 weeks later. I dressed simply, composed, not performing strength anymore, because by then I simply had it. Patrick met me outside the courthouse early, running through final details, though there wasn't much left to discuss. The settlement was fair, if not generous toward Marcus, given everything the paper trail had revealed. I didn't need to punish him through the numbers. The truth had already done more damage than any settlement could. Marcus was waiting inside with his own attorney, looking smaller somehow than the man I'd married. I'd heard secondhand that Lauren had already moved out of state with the twins, unwilling to remain somewhere that only reminded her of a foundation that was never what she believed. Marcus hadn't fought to stop her. Before the proceedings began, he tried one last time. "Claire," he said quietly, "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. Is there any version of this where we try again?" I looked at him for a long moment and felt something I hadn't expected, not anger, not even sadness, but a kind of quiet finality. The way you feel finishing the last page of a book you already know the ending to. "There isn't," I said. "Not because I can't forgive you, Marcus. I think in time I probably will, but forgiveness was never going to be the same thing as staying." He didn't argue. Something in his shoulders relaxed, like part of him had been waiting to hear exactly that. When it was finally over, when the last signature had been placed and the last document filed, I stood outside the courthouse in the late morning light and felt, for the first time in 8 years, entirely unaccountable to anyone else's version of my life. Diane called that evening. She didn't ask for forgiveness outright. I think she understood forgiveness isn't something you can request and receive on the same day. She just told me she was proud of how I'd handled everything, and hoped someday we might still find a way to know each other without Marcus standing between us. I told her I'd like that, and I meant it. Her silence had cost all of us dearly, but I'd watched her spend the last month trying, in whatever way she could, to make it right. I didn't see Marcus again after that day, aside from one brief, businesslike exchange months later over paperwork. I heard eventually that he'd sold his share of the logistics company and moved to another city, trying to build a life far enough away from the one that had fallen apart so completely in front of everyone he loved. As for me, I didn't rebuild my life around what I'd lost. I built it around what I'd learned. A year later, I used part of the settlement to start a small foundation, one that helps couples navigating infertility treatment get real transparency, full access to their own medical information, and support that doesn't leave anyone carrying blame that was never theirs to carry. I didn't name it after myself. It didn't need my story attached to it to matter. It just needed to exist. I think about those 8 years often now, not with bitterness, but with a strange kind of gratitude for the woman they eventually made me. I spent so long believing I had failed at the one thing I wanted most. I know now I never failed at anything. I simply trusted people who weren't honest enough to deserve it. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't making someone suffer. It's refusing to carry their lies any longer. If you've made it this far with me, I'd love to know, what would you have done in Claire's situation? Do you think she'll ever let someone new into her life? Or has she found everything she needs on her own? Let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from tonight. I love hearing from all of you. If you enjoyed this story, please hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. We've got so many more stories like this one coming, so make sure you're subscribed so you never miss one. Let's keep this journey going.